Okay.
Hi,
Jimmy's,
everybody. We have special guest with us right now, friend of the show. He's the author and journalist. Oh, I like when they do two things.
yeah.
He is known for his work as the editor of The Gray Zone, and he's the co-host of Moderate Rebels. He's also author of the book, The Management of Savagery. Please welcome back to the show, Max Blumenthal. Hey, Max, how are you?
Hey, Jimmy, how's it going?
Good. Max, how old are you?
I am 42.
So Max is here because I wanted to have a real smarty pants journalist guy
Yes.
who knows about how journalism is supposed to work.
Right.
To help me break down the clip that I teased yesterday of, now I don't know if how to say his name correctly. Anand, how do you say his name? Girahardis? How do you say it, Max?
I don't know if I did my homework.
Okay, that's all right. I don't know how to say. I'm reading it and I can't spell it, but it's this guy. Everybody knows if you.
Anand Girahardis.
Girahardis, right? So I'll just say,
Pretty close.
yeah, that's pretty close. Well, let's call him Anand. And the title of that segment he did on Rising was called How Bias Actually Works. Now, if you don't know who he is, he's a guy who wrote for the New York Times for at least, I think, 10 years. And he's been a contributor at MSNBC for the last 5 years. And he also wrote the book Winners Take All, The Elite Charade of Changing the World. Now, a couple of people that I know have said that they really liked that book and that was a really good book. I didn't read it. Max, have you read that book?
I have not read that book. And, Anand Girahardis, and if I got his name wrong, telemarketers, they always call me and say, Mr. Blue Menthol, like I'm a brand of blue menthol cigarettes. So I'm sure he can forgive me for not, if I don't get his name right. People don't get my name right all the time. But, honestly, I haven't followed him that much. He's managed to not attract my attention. And, that there's a reason for that. His book seems to be a critique of the kind of billionaire philanthropist charity industry and how it's basically provides cover for billionaires who don't pay taxes. And, it's good that someone else is out there saying that when people like Ralph Nader have been talking about that for decades. But, Ralph Nader is not allowed on MSNBC.
That is correct. Ralph Nader is not even allowed in polite society, it doesn't seem, because he actually advocates for people. And so I just want to... Go ahead. You want to say something?
Well, he's just not allowed near Democrats because of the 2000 election.
That's right.
He was the original Jill Stein in Russia and WikiLeaks.
Yes. So it's only taken 20 years for people to continue to think exactly the same. All right. So anyway... So Anand wrote that book, which made him a favorite of lefties. Now, every time I've seen him on MSNBC, he seems to be making the right critique. Yet I'm always suspicious of him. I've even done a video or two where I think I made fun of him a little, but he does have great hair, which I'm jealous of. So he went on Rising with the risers, Crystal and Sagar. And the first 6 minutes of the interview, I literally didn't know what the fuck he was talking about. I could not decipher what he was talking about. He has a new show on Vice, and it's called Seat at the Table. And it sounds like the premise of it is he's going to talk to people who normally don't have a seat at the table, like regular workers and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, man, that's a great idea. I wonder why don't I do that? Oh, shit, I do that all the time. So this is a big deal in corporate America. He's going to talk to a postal worker. Holy shit. So this is a big deal.
Yeah.
This is a big deal. He talked to a worker. And so he goes on and they start to talk about bias and what have you in the media. And everything he said, it just sounded off to me. And I'm like, wait a minute, this guy's a super smarty pants. I'm a dummy. How come I think everything he's saying is wrong? And I'm pretty sure because I think it is. And that's how bad it is when a guy like me can see through it. And so here we are, we're going to go through it. Now, I don't know this guy. I do know he follows me on Twitter. I don't follow him. But Ruby, our producer, did reach out to him to come on the show, and he didn't respond. This was a while ago. We've reached out to him to come on the show, and he didn't respond. But he follows me. That's interesting psychology right there, don't you think? So here we go. So we'll just break this down, and Matt, you can jump in whenever you feel like it.
It's 2020, so I kind of got my start in cable news on MSNBC 5 years ago. And
never got fired. To me, that's I'm suspect immediately. If you have a contract on MSNBC and you're a truth teller from the left and you get invited back, then you are manufacturing consent. You are not actually doing. What do you say to that, Max?
Well, I mean, you watch Anon talk, and if you're kind of like a normie, and it sounds like he really knows what he's talking about. He sounds convincing. He looks convincing. He looks like sort of a wise academic with salt and pepper hair, and he's always wearing dark clothes. A lot like Thomas Friedman. If you don't know shit, Thomas Friedman, just the way he talks sounds really convincing, and he makes things easily digestible. And then if you actually pay close attention, as you apparently did, you're like, what the fuck is this guy talking about?
Yes.
Because at the end, I mean, I don't want to ruin the ending. I mean, you're going to probably get to it.
Yes, we're going to get to it. Definitely, we're going to get to it.
So I won't ruin the ending. But yeah, he was in mainstream media for 5 years. He was at the New York Times for 10 years. I'll just say, so you probably never mentioned the Israel lobby, for example. If that happened, it would have been problematic. If, you hadn't been a humongous Russia-gator while being an MSNBC contributor. I mean, you didn't challenge the big lie of the last 3 years while you're posing as this great left-wing truth teller. In fact, when Donald Trump had his military parade, this obnoxious display of jingoism in Washington, I think it was last year, and there were tanks rolling on train tracks, like old World War II Sherman tanks rolling on train tracks just 10 minutes from my house, on the way to Pennsylvania Ave. Anon tweeted, "Putin's America."
Oh, my God.
It's Vladimir Putin's fault that we're having this jingoistic festival of American empire. It's all Russia's fault. Gamma rays from Putin's brain made Donald Trump do that, and it made people actually want to come out and celebrate and have nostalgia for this awful for tanks rolling down Pennsylvania Avenue, for martial law.
So that's
kind of how you manage to hang out in media while you offer a kind of milquetoast critique of billionaires and and call for Medicare for all, which Barack Obama campaigned on in 2008.
That's right. That's correct. All right. So it's good that you're here, so you can give that info so people can frame it. Now you know who he really is. Okay. That's who he is. He's a guy who poses as a real lefty, but of course he can't be a real lefty. If he was, he wouldn't be invited to the New York Times to write for 10 years, because you know what happens to guys who tell the truth in the New York Times? They end up like Chris Hedges. And he wouldn't be invited. If he was really doing a critique of power, he wouldn't be invited on MSNBC, because the people doing real critiques of power are Noam Chomsky and Ralph Nader, and they're never invited on MSNBC. So
he wouldn't be allowed on Vice, because Vice is just straight up corporate media.
Straight up.
It's the hipster arm of empire, and it's promoting. I mean, in this interview, Anon says, we need to call out the Iraqi WMD lie of the day. That's what Vice does. They launder every Iraqi WMD lie of the day. They're pushing. They pushed the Syria proxy war. They pushed the white helmets. They pushed the regime change operation in Ukraine. They celebrated the Azov battalion, the neo-Nazi wing of the Ukrainian National Guard, as freedom fighters. They pushed the new Cold War on China day after day, which, unfortunately, I was watching your last guest, Dylan Radigan, and he was doing a little bit of that too. But Vice basically exists to do just that. And last year, it was announced that Vice wasn't making enough money, and HBO was considering canceling it. And it got bailed out by a billionaire named George Soros, who people on the left are not allowed to critique George Soros, because people on the right, the far right, has taken that critique and made it anti-Semitic. So you can't talk about the fact that George Soros is actually, through his Open Societies Institute, funding opposition movements in countries where the U.S. seeks regime change, including in Hong Kong, where they just had this phony color revolution supported by the U.S. government, supported by the CIA, supported by Marco Rubio and Mike Pompeo. Soros is everywhere where the U.S. seeks regime change, in Latin America, in Venezuela, in Nicaragua. He's supporting the opposition movements. And in fact, in 1991, David Ignatius, not exactly a radical leftist, at the Washington Post, described George Soros as one of the billionaires doing what the CIA used to do covertly, doing it overtly as a private citizen. This was in the Washington Post. And so if Anand goes and critiques George Soros, he's going to be out of there, and he'll be called an anti-Semite, even if he says nothing about George Soros's Jewishness.
Okay, so so we're going to get to that WMD line, and let's remember all that stuff when we get there. All right, let's go.
Getting into a fight with Joe Scarborough on Twitter about something I'd written in the New York Times. And to Joe's credit, he invited me on to say, let's actually have this argument, right? Very rare spirit in these times when you disagree to say, like, let's actually have a conversation. So we did. And that kind of led to me being on MSNBC for several years and continuing, as far as I know. And I've had a great time. I've had, enjoyed my colleagues, enjoyed a lot of the things we've been able to talk about. But it has felt in many of the conversations I'm in, and I'm sure that's sort of why you also you both have created the show you have, that there were certain boundaries to the conversation, not enforced by some Comcast executive with a knife in his jacket, but just kind of intellectual boundaries of the conversation about issues of power and who America is working for. And there were often moments where you're talking about Michael Bloomberg, and Michael Bloomberg's money manager is at the table as a disinterested analyst, and those kinds of things. And so it seemed to me when I started having a conversation with Buck.
So that's a great point he makes, but he kind of brushes it away. He's like, I'll be at a panel at MSNBC critiquing Michael Bloomberg, one of the richest, most powerful men in the world, and his money manager will be at that same panel as if he's a disinterested party giving his opinions. And so that's a great point, actually, that he makes, but he kind of dismisses it. Well, and then he keeps going. So here we go.
To think about, is it possible to create a show that tries to sit with a different relationship to power, that actually tries to decenter power? And that means who we put on the show. I just interviewed a panel of 3 civil servants who work sort of anonymously for the government, but do really important things, put people like that on the show, including a postal worker. It also means just the mental framework of what we're covering. I don't need to tell both of you that. A lot of the way a conversation is lined up decides what kind of conversation it is. And a lot of what has happened on cable is things like the Iraq War are somehow in a normal lane, and things like universal health care are in an abnormal lane, a deviant lane. Right. And that's actually not how most people feel about a lot of these things. And so we tried to, think about, could we create a show that would reflect where most people are in the country on these?
Well, so I'll just say this, and we're going to get to it again, but he says where WMDs is normal, you could talk about that, but you can't talk about Medicare for all. So I like his critique, actually, there. He, again, makes a good critique. It's accurate. The problem is you don't have to go back 19 years to WM. You can go back right now to the current Red Scare, Russiagate. That somehow is normal. That's okay. So you won't tell the truth about what's actually happening right now. He has to go back 20 fucking years to act like that's the bad thing, instead of the bad thing we're living in right now, which would be actually useful for him to call out since he's on the air at MSNBC right now. But as you have already revealed, Max, he's a big Russiagator. So his mind is already scrambled. He's already a propagandist at the top of his lungs, and he's here going to give us the truth about what's wrong with our system. That's kind of ironic, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'll give him a chance, but I don't really expect that much given his performance during just the gigantic lie of Russiagate, which he completely failed to challenge. And I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the one person he kind of reminds me of in media is Chris Hayes, someone who has this kind of fake woke brand, but who manages to sort of survive in this suffocating corporate environment. And Chris Hayes, he didn't have one single Russiagate skeptic on. I mean, why couldn't he have had Aaron Mate on just to show, if he was so confident, just show how Aaron's arguments are all wrong. He couldn't do it. These people can't debate even the ideas where they feel confident. And now Chris Hayes was actually, I mean, I'd like to hear Anand's explanation too for why he didn't challenge Russiagate, why he pushed it. Now that it's so obvious that the whole thing was a sham, it's so obvious that now in these transcripts, these congressional transcripts, we see the head of CrowdStrike, the private cybersecurity firm that was hired by the FBI to determine that Russia hacked the DNC and John Podesta's emails, stating under oath that they have no evidence that Russian intelligence exfiltrated the emails. Now, I can't say who did it or who didn't do it, but this is the foundation of Russiagate. And under oath, the person who is supposed to be the oracle, who's supposed to know who exfiltrated the emails, who was hired by the FBI to do it, says that he doesn't know. So the whole foundation has completely crumbled, and yet it's not being touched by MSNBC. But Chris Hayes was asked about this in an interview.
Yes. So Chris, we covered this yesterday. Chris Hayes was asked about this, and what Chris Hayes said. Go ahead, Max. What did Chris Hayes say?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same kind of like grad student language, that you also hear Anand kind of using. These guys, when they talk, they always punctuate every point with the question right. They're like, right?
Yes.
That's so annoying, and it comes from grad school. But anyway, he says that, if you look, he blamed Russia for himself getting it so wrong and pushing so much paranoia. And he says if you go back and look at COINTELPRO stuff, referring to J. Edgar Hoover's program of dirty tricks to destroy the left in the 60s and 70s, basically the same combination of dirty tricks and surveillance the FBI was using on the FBI and the Black Panthers that drove them nuts is what Russia was using on Chris Hayes and his friends in the media to drive them nuts. And so he says, using that grad student language, we have to acknowledge Russia's agency here. Agency. What about the Central Intelligence Agency and John Brennan? What about their role in Russiagate? What about the fact that you hosted frauds like Malcolm Nance and Naveed Jamali, falsely identifying Naveed Jamali as an FBI double agent every time he came on your show? I'm masochistic enough that I ordered Naveed Jamali's book, To Catch a Russian Spy. I read it. He was never an FBI agent. He was at best an FBI dangle. He got like a certificate for participating in an FBI operation. Most of the book is about like his love of sports cars. He's about as much of an expert on Russian affairs. And I would say this for Malcolm Nance too, who is just an intelligence fraud. They're about as much of an expert on Russian affairs as Jeffrey Epstein and Jared from Subway are on the rights of children. I mean, and these are the guys that Chris Hayes voluntarily chose to have on every night. So maybe it wasn't Russia making him do it. Maybe it was Phil Griffin in corporate management. And maybe Phil Griffin in corporate management saw something in having a guy like Anand to maintain the left parameter and be the safe lefty and provide the safe critique, but never to go too far and touch Russiagate or to touch the new sham that we're being introduced to, which is pushing the new Cold War against China, which is replacing Russiagate, never touching the proxy war in Syria, never touching the Israel lobby, one of the most dominant forces in American politics. These are the red lines. And this is also about oligarchy, because empire is the projection of oligarchy abroad.
So to me, he's Barack Obama in media. But let's keep going. Here we go. So they go on to talk about the Republican Party. Watch this.
I think, clearly Trump has undamned and legitimated a lot of racism in people. But people broadly are as racist, more or less, as they were before Trump, right? Like what you can say is what has changed drastically. What has truly changed, and the thing I'm talking about, is the behavior of the Republican Party, which has decided to stop being a reason and fact-based party in the age of Trump. There were warning signs. This was not,
So I just want to stop it there. And what a joke that they just stopped being a party of reason and science just now. They just now did it. And by the way, both parties, neither party is a party of science or reason or any kind of damn thing you're talking about. Neither party is. Barack Obama opened the Arctic to drilling twice whenever Shell Oil asked. He lifted the restriction on exporting fossil fuels, which is why there's fracking pipes underneath this country from coast to coast. Barack Obama bragged that we had the highest petroleum output in the history of our country under his presidency. Barack Obama doesn't give a shit about science any more than Donald Trump gives a shit about science. And the Republican Party all of a sudden stopped. This guy is so full of shit. I could smell it from Pasadena during quarantine. What do you say to this?
Yeah, I mean, remember George W. Bush?
Yeah.
Seriously, like, and there's this whole campaign to normalize Bush now and make Bush, I'm George Bush and I'm just a guy you want to have a barbecue with. I love hugging Michelle Obama. I'm just friendly, smirking chimpanzee from Texas. We need to come together for the better future of tomorrow and put food on our families. It's like we don't remember Bush basically putting the Christian right, one of the most extreme forces in the world, in power in the White House. Remember how Bush refused to fund stem cell research?
Yes.
Life-saving stem cell research? That was as odious as any anti-scientific policy Donald Trump has, and it was because he was a member of the Christian right.
Yes.
Do you
remember when Ronald Reagan...
I wrote a book about all this, by the way. It's called Republican Gomorrah, and it's about how the Republican Party was overtaken by irrational, anti-science, homophobic extremists. And Bush, he was putting people in Health and Human Services Department positions who believed that AIDS could be spread by sweat and tears. So here's a guy to tell us that, Trump is broken with this great Republican tradition.
This tradition of science and reason in the Republican Party. Ronald Reagan wouldn't even mention AIDS. It's just...
He's responsible for that. He's way more responsible for the AIDS crisis than the Chinese government is for spreading coronavirus to the world, but we don't call AIDS the America virus. In any case, if you listen to this guy, you'd think that Lincoln was Trump's predecessor.
Yeah.
Nowhere, Trump is not solely responsible for this, but there is a full-on decision, in my view, at the high levels of the party apparatus, not in regular people's hearts, to embrace the Trump route rather than the route of a party that actually has some history and has some, a sensible intuition, the way every party does.
Okay, I just want to stop right there. So the Republicans have decided to go down the road of Trump instead of a party of reasonable intuition that every party has. He just said that. Reasonable intuition that what party in the history of the world has ever had reasonable intuition? What kind of shit is this guy slinging? And who does he think he's talking to? For some reason, he gets it past them. But I was high already when I was watching this, and it didn't slip past me. I was fucking lighting my bowl, and I'm like, what the fuck? What? Go ahead.
It's just the kind of bloviating boilerplate and mishegas that makes him such a conveniently ineffective voice of the designated left, which is, I think, another reason why he's put where he is, when there's so many other people who actually are part of the movement, who actually are part of a real left-wing movement, who are more effective, who are out in the wilderness. I never seen him at an anti-war rally. I would recognize him if he was there, too.
Yeah, I would love to see him have Mike Preisner on to talk about some stuff. That would be fun. Or you. That would be great. Or me. He never will.
After this, it ain't happening.
No, it ain't happening. It's not. He won't come on. He won't even return. He follows me on Twitter, but he won't return a message to come on my show. That shows me he's afraid of real questions.
This is the interesting thing on him, though, because, in terms of embracing the Trump route, as somebody like yourself, you want, to challenge economic orthodoxy in both parties. And I think that that's something very much that exists. Isn't that part of the Trump route? Don't you think that's so much of why Trump was able to succeed?
just because orthodoxy needs to be challenged doesn't mean anybody challenging it is correct, is doing a good job. You know, do I think that in a pre-Trump world, would you say it would be great to have a Republican coming in and saying, you know, this party's positions on free trade aren't serving the American people the way we say they are? In either party, yeah, that would have been a good thing. Would it have been a good thing to come in and say, you know what, this party's positions on China could be, you know, the Chinese are actually pretty smart about making sure their trade deals work for them. We could be smart. Like, yeah, there's space for that. Unfortunately, the guy we got to do that is a semi-literate racist prick. And that doesn't, the fact that he's challenging I mean, every Thanksgiving uncle challenges orthodoxy. Doesn't mean they're all right. Challenging orthodoxy is the beginning. It's still a responsibility to be intelligent and correct.
Okay, so I'll just make a quick assessment of that. The fact that every uncle challenges orthodoxy, but that doesn't, I don't care if Trump is right. I don't care if Trump is whatever. Again, he's the village idiot. He's saying things that no one else will say, and somehow you still denigrate him while he says the things that need to be said because you don't like him. That's what he's saying, right?
I mean,
or maybe I'm missing it. Maybe I'm missing it. What do you think? Go ahead.
The Thanksgiving uncles are usually like pretty orthodox. Like they,
yes. It's another good point.
You know, I mean, I'm Jewish, so like my extended family, they're pretty liberal, but there's like sometimes like a guy will come sort of from outside the family and he'll be like a huge Islamophobe and try to like corner the kids in the room. But I'm like, this guy sounds pretty orthodox to me. But, you know, what Trump did was transition from 2016 when he was challenging orthodoxy to promise his base things they genuinely wanted that no candidate had offered them before, like anti-interventionism. He was challenging the case for the Iraq War. He was challenging deeper U.S. involvement in Syria. He was dismantling the Bush family on live TV.
Yes.
He was saying they didn't protect America on 9/11. He, you know, initially he was saying he would support, you know, a peace process in Israel, Palestine, and then of course Sheldon Adelson entered the room. But the point to make about Trump isn't that he's just fundamentally a racist prick, which he is that he sold out on the 2016 Trump and got rolled by the neocons, which was, well, largely, or not largely, but at least partly to do with Russiagate and people like Anand who were pushing that kind of narrative. The next thing you know, you got H.R. McMaster as the head of the National Security Council. Then he's followed by John Bolton. You know, you got Mike Pompeo running the State Department. I mean, basically the neocons are in charge. And you're saying Donald Trump.
And you're saying, Max, that the reason why Donald Trump staffed up with neocon warmongers was because he was feeling the heat from the left and the intelligence community and the media as being a traitor and being in bed with Russia. So his response to that was to become over right-wing in his choosing of staff, correct?
Yeah, just the general inertia from media and Trump himself not being able to really resist it, not being intelligent enough to resist it. So it's more about Trump not following through than something fundamental here. But basically, my point is his whole critique of Trump is sort of simplistic red meat to, you know, the normie liberal resistance that he's claiming to stand apart from.
Yes, right. So your critique of Trump is actually a better one, the way Trump from 2016 sold out the people that voted for him instead of just his critique is this guy's an asshole and I don't think he should, you know, it's just stupid.
I mean, just, you know, Trump's a far-right president. He's doing a lot of things I find odious, particularly his war on immigration or on immigrants, things like that. But, you know, there were a few areas where Trump completely stepped out of the box on foreign policy, for example, in Korea, where you have 80% of South Koreans yearning for an end of armistice agreement to this war that is dragged on, that's been imposed on them by the U.S. so they can see their relatives in the North and live in peace. And Trump finally steps forward with Dennis Rodman, of all people. And, you know, there was definitely a push from powerful elements to try to broker some deal. And every liberal on MSNBC and every Democrat in Washington is trashing him as some kind of dictator lover, when this is something people on the Korean Peninsula have been dreaming of. So there were some areas where Trump could have accomplished things. He could have, made some new treaties on intermediate ballistic missiles with Putin. But instead, when he sits down to talk with Putin, he's accused of collusion and being a Kremlin asset. And now we're seeing those treaties just systematically ripped up, and we're living in a much more dangerous world.
Because of Russiagate, and something that a guy like Anand pushed.
And you have people on the left who are claiming to be populists who are pushing Chinagate or a new Cold War with China, who really have no qualification to talk about China. The people that I see are the loudest voices in left media. They've done very little scholarship or journalism on China, and they're basically playing into Trump's hands here, because Trump's going to run this campaign on resentment of China. Among many other wedge issues.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?